Hello, it's Andrew Eborn here with another edition of the Andrew Eborn Show. And that's a wonderful glimpse of my very good friend, Ajay Parekh, who's in Hong Kong. How are you, Ajay?
I am very well, Andrew. Delighted to be speaking to you.
You are looking very well. And I like I like the people's backdrop. Whenever I go around the world, we have a little look and you've got your little waving cat and you're doing this. It's fantastic.
Let me declare one thing straight away. I'm actually not in my own apartment. I'm in a very dear friend's apartment.
And Do they know? Does your dear friend know you're in their apartment?
They will do very soon.
And whereabouts in Hong Kong is their apartment? Whereabouts in Hong Kong is their apartment?
We're in the beautiful part of Happy Valley in Hong Kong.
I love Happy Valley.
Just by the racecourse. I can see my view is of the racecourse just to the right now. So
well, you have to turn the camera at an appropriate moment. You can get that fantastic view.
You tell me when.
Now we see, and what I love about this, Ajay, apart from the opportunity to catch up with old mates around the world, is that they can effectively be our eyes and ears on the ground as to what's happening. And there's all sorts of things I want to talk to you about today, if you've got a little bit of time. But first of all, as you're in Hong Kong, tell us what's actually going on.
So life's good. People are still out there. I can see people running around the racetrack now. Last Wednesday, there was a marked shift in the COVID situation, in that there was a slightly greater level of lockdown. Since January, we've all been wearing masks, we've all been washing our hands, we've all been doing all the right things, and Hong Kong has been dealing with the issue, I think, very well. I think, if I'm correct, the facts, we only have about 2,000 cases and just under 20 deaths, as awful as that is. So for a country that's literally walking distance into the border of China, I think it's been remarkable to watch such a dense urban population who live cheek by jowl, who don't have the space and luxury of parks and environments. It's been very good. It's been very good to see. However, in the last month, there's been a marked spike of increased cases through people traveling back to Hong Kong. The quarantine process has had a few, too many dispensations in it. And suddenly there were a couple of hundred new cases 2 weeks ago. So quite rightfully so, they started to lock it all down. Restaurants even closed for 48 hours. They're now back open because they realize that Hong Kong cannot function without people being able to eat and drink out. But it's only 2 people at a time. Only 2 people can sit together. They're advising that no more than 2 people, unless you're with family members, be out and about and socializing together. So people are being respectful of that. I've stayed in this apartment pretty much for the last 2 days myself, other than a few errands that I've had to run. So it's good. The weather's good.
And Hong Kong itself has changed massively. I used to go regularly. My sister and her husband used to be based in Hong Kong. A fantastic time. Her children grew up there. And I used to always pop in on my way to Japan to go and see our friends at Dentsu and Fuji Television and various other glorious Japanese clients. And I'd always spend many, many happy times in Hong Kong. But it's changed massively because when you used to arrive on the airplane, you used to basically look as though you could see people doing their washing in their apartments, couldn't you? Yeah. And you weren't quite sure if you've got to land in the sea. It was quite the most extraordinary landing anywhere in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was Kowloon. You came straight in over and almost through Kowloon, ultimately. All that's changed now, of course, because it's all on Lantau Island with a Norman Foster sort of glamorous airport with many more millions of people that can fly through it now. So yeah, it's changed a lot. It's changed.
The other thing that happened, Ajay, is when as soon as you arrived, you virtually hit the markets, because just in there it was like the old and the new. The juxtaposition was right in your face, and that's all gone now as well. They're all international shops and things now, aren't they?
All gone. Yeah, Kowloon in itself has changed and gentrified, but certainly Hong Kong. I haven't been coming to Hong Kong for as long as maybe you have, but it has changed dramatically. I would have thought in the last 10 to 15 years, certainly, and exponentially, certainly over the last 30 years, I would have thought. I have a lot of friends who have been here for 20, 30 years, and they have photographs of their old apartments, and they're all districts, and it's remarkable to see a place change that much in short time.
Absolutely, and not just the landscape, but politically as well. I mean, obviously the handover, which happened, and I was there during part of the handover. We hear all sorts of reports in the newspapers, and I always say people should always question everything, or try and get your news from many different sources. And I encourage the children. I know you have two wonderful girls as well. So basically, I have a boy and a girl, and we always encourage them to have a look and say, don't just get your news from one source. We look at the BBC, we look at ITV, but then we'll look at CNN and Fox, and look at RT, all that sort of stuff, because somewhere between all of those, the truth is out there. But question everything. Now, the reports about what's going on in Hong Kong, in the UK, and I'm sure you've seen these reports, are quite horrendous. What is actually going on?
On a street level, you wouldn't think there was much going on. There is no doubt that on particular days, and I'm not in the know because I'm not local, I'm not connected at a community level, but when there are certain political announcements being made, or certain things going on in the judiciary buildings, you sort of know that the protests sort of appear, bus routes get changed a little bit, and there's no doubt about it. There is a huge amount of undercurrent of activity going on, but the government, Carrie Lam and the team, and China are doing a very strong job of curtailing all of that, clamping down on it, and making sure that it doesn't get out of control. I think we've all seen the pictures from last year. I've experienced it. I've never experienced tear gas before, but I did a year ago here on the streets of Hong Kong. And it's difficult. It's difficult to know what the future holds for those 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-old professionals out there who want a life in the way that we understand modern Western worlds to be developed, and they don't see a future. They don't see a future, and it's being eaten away day by day by day in all manner of infringements. So I'm fortunate. I'm an expat. You know, I can afford to get on a plane and leave. It's a unique position we have. So I suspect we don't really understand the true depths of that fear or that situation that they have. But certainly I can vouch for the fact that the expense of living in any city, in any modern city now, is huge. And as you know, we know even in London, there are many people who can't afford to actually live in the city they want to. So it must be very difficult. So
how is the media? How is the media in Hong Kong reporting it?
You're quite right. You mentioned RT, Radio 3 HK. So I have that as an app. They report things. It's very, very much controlled. It's all very much official stuff that goes on there. We hear rumors. Friends of ours constantly tell me, don't mention the name on any kind of social media. Don't talk about it. They're listening. You know, it's by fear alone that people are very careful about what they say, how they say it, and what they discuss publicly. But, you know, people do discuss it. We discuss it. I'm probably more conscious when I discuss political issues with my local counterparts, because you suddenly realize that 2 of them are born and bred Hong Kong. A couple of them are Chinese. Somebody's married to a policeman, you know, and you suddenly discover that actually it's not okay, because they're not comfortable talking about the politics of the day. So as Brits, we like to talk about stuff, and we're quite cynical of the world, and we're quite open about it. But you get reminded every so often that actually it's not okay, and people are suffering for the political situation that's going on here. So.
And I think, and that's the difficulty, isn't it? Because I always advocate it's jaw, not war. I think if you can get people, firstly, to actually get the facts, and it's evidence-based journalism as opposed to just speculation, which is why one of the blessings of doing this show is, and as you know, you're a regular watcher and you kindly comment. I've seen all those comments in all sorts of social media. We get people around the world, and we had people in the streets of LA while they were having riots there. We had people going down to Bristol. We had people in the centre of London, all the way to Australia and Zambia, and many, many places in between. What's great is getting people on the ground saying, look, this is their perspective. And I always get it's only one person's perspective, but it's very helpful rather than just speculation. Because all the news reports that just say, oh, this is terrible, this is what's happening, there are always at least 2 sides to every story. And I think the more, as you know, background as a lawyer, the more we want to look at this, try and get to a conclusion, is to understand everybody's perspective. Because if people can understand where other people are coming from and the perception, we can make sure that so often reality and perception are not aligned. What we can do is make sure you can question everything and try and get to a logical, intelligent solution to the extent that one is possible.
I would also suggest that with 6-7 billion people on the planet, there's probably 6 or 7 billion truths out there as well.
Absolutely.
So I can only speak for my truth, and when I walk out of this building and see what I see, and I go to my nice coffee shop with the croissants, and that's my truth in Hong Kong. Life is good, and it's been very good being here. So, but I certainly see the troubles that this place has. It doesn't bode well for the future. And I'm afraid we are all intrinsically connected to the global politics, the geopolitics of money and finance and trade. And I hear more stories of people leaving this town, not just individuals, families, but companies moving to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to Singapore. Singapore is constantly on the agenda. Everybody wants to move to Singapore, of course. So that's not nice. It makes me wonder what's left here, really. So, which is a shame, because it is a great place, and it will always be Hong Kong. It's the hub of Asia,
And Hong Kong is, as you say, it's a fantastic place, a fantastic scenery, fantastic cuisine, fantastic vibe about it. And one of the vibes that they had was the joys of walking around the markets. And what's happened to those at the moment?
Oh no, the wet markets are still there. I go and get my fruit and veg. As a lifelong vegetarian, I often struggle walking through the fish markets and the meat markets. You just have to sort of keep a blinkered vision on it. But no, the wet markets are good. We go to a particular one just down the road called in Wan Chai. It's fun. There's a huge amount of trade there. We did wonder if some of the wet markets would have had a huge drop in customers. Admittedly, we don't go to the one that's very local here now. It's a little bit smaller. You actually have to go through the meat market, the fish market, and then to the vegetables. Puts me off a little bit. So we go to the big one where it's booming with trade and people are still buying. It's the best way to buy good, cheap, affordable food, vegetables, fruits, and drinks. So.
And there's a wonderful buzzing atmosphere. I love a market. Any country that I visit, whether it's the wonderful spice markets and the glorious smells and the colours and the ambient noise is just sensational.
You would have loved it. We've just finished lychee season. So for the last month, we've been eating lychees the size of golf balls.
Right.
And I mean, you're paying 15, 20, 30 pounds for a little bundle. It's not cheap. But I'd never discovered lychees until I saw those here. It's the fruit here is wonderful that comes from.
And China and it comes up with some glorious creation. I mean, the first time I ever had, it sounds bizarre, but the first time I ever had sort of sweet corn ice cream, I think that was that was in Hong Kong, and it was a local McDonald's, and they always have their own little variations of whatever it is. They have like a Chinese version of whatever the Big Mac might be, but they also have sweet corn ice cream, which is interesting. And I think the more you can try the palate and try different cuisines, but as you say, many people are now becoming vegan or vegetarian, and a new way of sort of understanding just how wonderful the range is now.
On your point that you made earlier, the other massive thing about Hong Kong that you cannot ignore is that it is the whole of Asia in one place. So, you walk past the Indonesian restaurant, the Filipino restaurant, the Cambodian restaurant, you'll be eating from any one of 20 regions of China of different types of cuisines and tastes and flavors. And that is profoundly amazing here, which I love, certainly. And then to your point about the vegetarian vegan thing, it's booming. You cannot walk past a street or district without being sold an Impossible Burger or a meat-free burger. Restaurants are booming with it as well, and it's been great. I lived in Shanghai before I came to Hong Kong, and we had discovered Asian vegetarian food in abundance. When we came to Hong Kong, we were a little bit unsure as to whether there would be just as much. In fact, it's everything and above. It's been remarkable for that. We certainly haven't struggled to eat in any context.
Yeah. And certainly, I mean, worldwide now, that veganism in particular has had a massive sort of spotlight shone on it, and the advantages and health benefits of eating vegan food. But also what I find, and I've had the best mac and cheese was vegan. And I go along to all these different, I go along to these different festivals, and we'll come on to those as well in a bit. But and there's a wonderful community. Vegans, for whatever reason, there's that sort of glory. There's a wonderful community. You go there, is that buzz. You get all the little stalls which not just do the food and the fantastic preserves and the different ways they do different dishes, but all the t-shirts and the be kind sort of whole attitude. It's a great feeling.
My daughter's just sat on the other side of the lounge. She's delighted to hear this conversation about veganism because she's gone 100% vegan this year, as has my wife as well. It's great. There's a couple of things I struggle with the vegan thing. Is the vegan movement is moving into the sort of expensive elite end as well. You know, it's a lifestyle choice. Therefore, restaurants are now setting up with beautifully plated food, almost Michelin star. And it's sort of, for me, vegan food was actually just the best Indian vegetarian food you could have ever had. It was never labeled vegan. It was just without dairy, and often wasn't made with milk. So it's interesting to see how, as a global movement and a market force, it's moved on and it's changed. It's great because it's definitely attracting people to eat something other than meat as much as they may have done previously, which is a good thing.
That's great. Well, my daughter's been a vegan for some time, so your daughter will be delighted to hear that as well. And she's also consulted a number of restaurant chains as to what they can do. And actually, when you look at many menus, there was already vegan dishes on it. You just had to sort of turn around and say, just label it to tell it people. And we use the argument, and I sat with her on some of these meetings, that basically it's not just about the one person in the group who might be vegan. But what happens is that one person will potentially influence the whole of the group of 10 people they might be with as to where they go to eat. So if you shine a spotlight on this menu, there's a vegan dish, then people can come along and enjoy that.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen this myself, but I heard that in England, Pizza Express, or one of the high street chains, are now doing vegan pizzas. And I've heard about McDonald's even trialing stuff in some of the European locations. As I say, vegan diet for me is actually just good vegetarian food, excluding the eggs and the dairy, and I've lived a life on it in abundance. But there's also the other discovery I had in China was and in Singapore, where the mock meats. This is slightly strange for maybe some of the viewers. I actually like the textures and I like the tastes, but I would go to Chinese Buddhist restaurants because they have to serve the millions of Chinese Buddhists who don't eat meat, but they want something that looks and tastes like lamb koftas or chicken strips. And I've tried a lot of that stuff, and I like the meat versions. I don't like the fish versions. Having a mock shark, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it. It was just a little bit on the end of the rubber scale.
Okay.
But it exists everywhere. So,
but they're glorious creatively with the names as well. So you have the vegan version would be chili non carne or something like that, which I think, yes, go for it. Which is really good. So our daughter Chloe, she consulted for Spaghetti House. So they had they have 12 different restaurants in London. And basically now we was delighted on my birthday, Luigi, who owns the place with his family, owns the whole chain. He gave us effectively the restaurant because he had to do social distancing here. And we could sample some of the great dishes, and they were fantastic dishes that people can have. And I think the thing about veganism is beforehand it used to suffer. And you're in the communication business, it used to suffer from PR. And people used to say there were limited dishes, it tasted like cardboard and that sort of stuff. But the reality is, there is now so extensive. And as I say, definitely the best mac and cheese I have ever had. Some of the dishes, and you talk about the fish dishes, they did fantastic prawns. It was not, obviously not prawn, a corn or whatever they would call it, play with the name. And they were sensational. And sensational was the name that I set up with our daughter, but for the company, because obviously sation and that sort of stuff are one of the ingredients for veganism as well.
Yeah, no, very much so. I'm loving it. I love my food anyway, but eating out in Hong Kong is fascinating because people live in very small, confined homes. Kitchens are very small. My friend's apartment have a very big kitchen there, but all the same, you live very humbly in your small, very expensive apartments. So everything happens out on the streets, of course. Everybody eats out, and it's very affordable. It's actually as affordable, if not cheaper, to eat out than it would be to go and buy your veg in Marks and Spencer's down the road, Waitrose down the road. The shopping malls here have got amazing food courts, but when you're paying, 10, 15, 20 pounds for a small block of cheddar, right. It's expensive. It's expensive to buy the nicer products and ingredients that you might want. So people are used to eating out very regularly, which I think is challenging with the COVID lockdown.
Yeah, and looking at that, I mean, it is the way that people have had to change. And I've looked at this as a common theme around the world and the different rules and regulations. You mentioned earlier that it's basically two people can book a restaurant now, appropriate social distancing. The whole culture depends on eating out. So that must be really, really tricky. What are the other rules? I mean, are cinemas open? Can people go and see shows? What are the other rules?
No, cinemas closed early on. I think in about February, when there was a bit of a strong lockdown, cinemas closed, shopping malls were even closing. People actually just voluntarily just vacated the streets. I think the experience of SARS, the experience of MERS, people have a huge amount of civic duty, if I can use that word, and they just did the right thing. And I'm generalizing hugely, but there was the old camp of a third of Hong Kong that knew what to do, and they just locked themselves into their homes and never came out unless they needed to. Then there was a middle third who simply had to work, helpers from other Asian countries, and keep the city running. They were out and about, everybody wearing masks. And then, truth be told, then you've the third, the expats, who I think for a long while were in denial. They wore the masks when they had to. They knew they had to wash their hands. You get temperature checked here just getting into a taxi, into a building. You can't go into the bar without being temperature checked. So those kind of things created a culture which enforced people to have to behave a certain way. And there was a little bit of a backlash maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago, where just too many expats were walking around without masks on. So you could see the conversations on social media by locals, if only they would wear masks. It was quite odd because I was reading reports of situations in London, on Oxford Street in central London, where people of an Asian look were being targeted because they were different, they were wearing masks. This was earlier on in the year, and there was a bit of prejudice and maybe even racism going on in those situations. I was almost seeing a reverse version of that, where actually the expats were not understanding the severity of what's going on here. And actually you can't just stand around outside the pub, the bars, and keep drinking all day and all night. So that, I think the Hong Kong government struggled to know how to deal with that, because it would make a big story globally to identify things in that context. But truth be told, last 2 months, 3 months, it's been spectacular. Everybody wears masks. There are patrols on beaches, making sure people are not out on beaches. Beaches are closed now, but certainly restaurants are very careful about. In fact, I was in a restaurant 2 weeks ago, and a whole team of duty officers came in, tape measure, started measuring the distance between tables. And they made the staff move to sets of tables because they were a little bit too close for their liking, ultimately. There was nobody sat on the tables, mind you, but they still made them move the furniture to their liking. So from from that perspective, yeah, they've got to do something. It's a very urban, very densely populated island, and mainland.
So,
They've got
two people in a restaurant. You have to wear masks outside. What are the penalties if you don't comply?
Do you know, I don't know the facts behind this, but I have heard fines being given out of 2,000 Hong Kong dollars if you are out without a mask on. And I've heard stories of police patrols walking around in 6s and 8s and 10s in popular parts of town, on beaches, and essentially groups of teenagers being fined because they weren't wearing masks. 2,000 Hong Kong dollars, what is that? That's £200. Yeah. I've also heard that the maximum fine could be up to 5,000 Hong Kong dollars if you're not obeying with the rules and regulations ultimately. So a little bit arbitrary there, but certainly I've seen on social media PR stories of people being fined. And I suppose that helps to keep the story going.
And I think that's, I mean, but also she says the culture over there, and also in other parts of Asia, is that when people have a cold, it's very common that they would wear a mask anyway. So it was all part of the culture, if you like, before we had the current situation.
Yeah, I think personal hygiene on that level has changed my view. In England, if I had a cold, maybe I would be more careful about washing my hands and face more often. Maybe I would carry 2 sets of clean handkerchiefs, not just the groggy one that I've been keeping in my pocket for days.
Yes, the family hand-me-down, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we're all about to learn just what a virus is ultimately, in whatever form it comes. So.
And you mentioned social media, Ajay, as well. And everybody, it is interesting because a few months ago, BC, before Corona, everybody on social media was a constitutional expert. They were all talking about Brexit over here and what you could do and you can't do this and proroguing and what that means. And everybody on social media was an expert. Tell me, because over here and in many places around the world, everybody's an expert. Everybody's a virologist. They've all got this uncle or aunt or somebody who's worked in this, who's got this little theory about how we can fix things. How is social media in Hong Kong?
Well, social media in Hong Kong is in abundance because, of course, here you can't just have your Facebook and your Twitter. You then also have to have your WhatsApp. You also have to have your Signal, which is an important one, boys and girls. You also have to have your WeChat. So I have 6 different things going on and conversations and groups. It's amazing social media in Asia anyway, because from when I started coming here, everybody has the phone. Everything is done on the phone. You pay for things on the phone. Everybody video calls. Everybody leaves audio messages. Technology is just much more in abundance and used much more greatly here. I get the odd occasion when my mobile phone service provider is testing the 5G. So people have got 5G here on days. I can do so much more here, which reminds me of the fact that the last time I was in England and catching my train from Waterloo down to Guildford and down to Portsmouth, of course, I don't even get a phone signal. You go through blackouts where you don't even get that phone signal. So it makes it challenging. And
it is interesting because as soon as you mention the signal, you've now frozen. So we're going to take a little break and we'll be back with RJ, AJ, straight after these messages. We'll see you very, very soon.